Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something that is just incredibly frustrating. It's that invisible, almost physical struggle of desperately wanting to start a task, but feeling completely paralyzed. We've all been there, right?
So, picture this. You know exactly what needs to be done. The clock is ticking, the work is literally right in front of you, and on a completely conscious level, you genuinely want to just get it over with. But you simply cannot physically get yourself moving. It's kind of like the command center in your brain is firing off the spark, sending out this lightning bolt of intention, but the signal just gets completely lost in a mess of tangled wires before it ever reaches your hands and feet.
Let's look at a really common example. Say you're staring at a manual. Maybe you just unbox some ridiculously complicated piece of IKEA furniture, and you're just staring at step one. Your eyes are physically moving over the text, but the information, it just bounces right off. It's like there's a force field around the words. Now, this isn't because you lack intelligence. It's because, right at that precise moment, your brain is actively struggling to process that very first, foundational step, even when you're trying your absolute hardest to absorb it.
And you know, this highlights a really painful misconception in our society. To the outside world, that slumped posture, staring blankly at a screen, well, it just looks like laziness. People immediately assume it's a lack of motivation or discipline or just plain apathy. But if we look beneath the surface, what's actually happening internally is a massive cognitive traffic jam. It is a tangled mess of overloaded gears completely stalling out because way too many signals are firing at once. So the outward appearance of doing nothing, it entirely masks an internal reality where the brain is actually working overtime just trying to organize itself to take a single step.
So it's absolutely crucial that we validate this hidden struggle. We need to take this out of the realm of, a personal moral failure and root it firmly where it belongs, in biology and cognitive science.
Let's give it its proper scientific name, executive dysfunction. Just knowing this term exists is honestly a huge relief. By definition, it's a state where the transition between knowing what to do and actually taking action just breaks down. Notice the distinction there. It's an issue with the friction of taking action. It is absolutely not a lack of willpower, and it is definitely not a lack of desire. The intention is fully formed and ready to go. The problem lies entirely in the execution. The bridge between the thought and the action is simply temporarily out of order.
Now you might be wondering, who exactly deals with this? When does this bridge actually break down? Well, while executive dysfunction is super common and frequently discussed when it comes to ADHD and autism, the truth is, it can happen to absolutely anyone. Think about when you're juggling the heavy anvil of chronic stress, constantly racing against a ticking clock, or facing the dark storm of burnout. In those moments, your executive functions, the very tools you need to initiate tasks, are often the very first things to shut down. Basically, when your mental system is overloaded, it trips the breaker.
You can actually think of this complex psychological hurdle a bit like pure physics. It's all about going from a state of rest to a state of action. Think of your brain like a massive, heavy locomotive. When it's at rest, it requires an enormous, concentrated burst of energy just to overcome that initial inertia and get those giant wheels turning. Once it's moving, it's so much easier to coast and keep that momentum, right? But that initial shift from 0 to 1, that is where the entire battle is fought.
There's a great quote from our source material that really hits the nail on the head. The step between knowing and doing is difficult. Think about when you find yourself just staring into space. In that moment, your brain is essentially laying in a comfortable hammock. It feels safe, it feels relaxed. But suddenly, a task appears. Now, your brain has to violently switch gears from resting in that cozy hammock to pushing a heavy boulder uphill. And naturally, it heavily resists that sudden, exhausting shift.
Let's actually break down the hidden effort required here. What looks to an outsider like one simple, effortless step, the classic just start advice, is actually a highly complex three-part sequence. First, the brain has to actively direct its attention away from whatever it was doing and lock onto the new task. Second, it has to hold all that relevant information in its working memory without dropping it. And third, it has to physically initiate the action. That invisible mental load is incredibly heavy. When you're already fatigued or the task is super complex, pulling off that three-step sequence becomes drastically harder.
Okay, so having mapped out the mechanics of the problem, we really need to change our approach. We spend so much energy fighting our own brains and just draining our reserves with guilt. Instead, we need to pause, reset, and shift to a much more constructive, empowering perspective.
We need to start asking a completely different question about what our brain actually needs to function optimally. If you take one single thing away from this explainer, please let it be this. It is an activation problem, not an unwillingness problem. You are not unmotivated, you are just experiencing a temporary mechanical difficulty in sparking the engine. Recognizing this is just incredibly freeing. Because think about it, if it's an unwillingness problem, you feel shame. But if it's a mechanical activation problem, well, the good news is that mechanics can be troubleshot, mechanics can be fixed.
So how do we actually fix it? First, by throwing out that unhelpful guilt trip of asking, why can't I just do it? That old habit only breeds frustration, self-doubt, and ultimately even more paralysis. Instead, put on your detective hat. Replace the blame with an empowering investigation. Ask yourself, what does my brain need right now to start? Maybe it's a quieter room because sensory overload is jamming up the gears. Maybe it's breaking a massive, intimidating project into tiny, manageable puzzle pieces so the first step isn't so scary. Or honestly, maybe it's just taking a quick, guilt-free 5-minute rest to let the engine cool down before trying again.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to really sit with this reframed question. What does my brain need to be able to start? The next time you find yourself frozen, staring at a laptop, or actively avoiding that massive pile of laundry, just stop judging yourself. Acknowledge that heavy mental load, be a little kinder to your overloaded mind, and simply ask it what it needs. So what is your brain asking for right now? Thanks for joining me.